Another day, another airport, or so it seems. But this is a good opportunity to share together, looking at our Sabbath school material, using the time profitably between flights. This happens to be Chicago. This week we're looking at number 6 in the series on the Gospel in Galatians. This is entitled The Priority of the Promise. And I like that title, The Priority of the Promise, because what Paul is saying here in Galatians chapter 3 is that the promise preceded the law chronologically, and the promise precedes the law in terms of its significance as well. In fact, the law was given 430 years on from the promise that God made there to Abraham, that covenant, that special promise of what God would do together for Abraham. And I think that as we think of the priority of the promise, what Paul is really trying to say here is that all those people who were upsetting the Galatians by saying that law is supremely important are missing the priority of the promise, that the promise came first, that God is giving his promise of salvation, of his healing, of his transformation, well in advance of any prescription or description of law keeping. And as we have here in the notes, there's a clincher that comes right there at the end in verse 19, when Paul clearly states that the law was added. The law was added on. It wasn't the priority. If it was the priority, it would have been given at the same time as the promise, but it was not. It was added later as a benefit, not as a problematic kind of solution, but as a benefit. It was added, says Paul, because of transgression, because of wrongdoing, so that people would understand where they were going wrong. But that in no way annulled the promise. The promise was the all-important thing, the promise that God was going to be Abraham's God, that he was going to lead him through, that he was going to make him the father of many nations, that he was going to be the one to save him. And it should be the same for us. The law keeping is helpful in the sense that we know where we are, but we should recognize that the law was added because of transgression, because we're wrong people. We do the wrong things and we need to have it all spelled out. But that is not the way, because the promise came first. God's promise comes to us to say, I want to be with you. I want to be your God. I want to share together in your life. I want to heal you. I want to transform you. It's not that you're in legal problems, although I guess we could also say we are, but that's not my primary concern. It's the fact that you're going to die. Rather like a physician or a health professional coming to you and say, I'm sorry, you don't have much time left. Tragic situation. And that's the situation for all of us because of the curse of sin, that disease of sin, if you like, in our lives. We have that fatal syndrome, if you will. But God in his promises, I am going to come in and I'm going to transform you in the same way as he made the promise to Abraham and the promises to David and the promises to Noah, promises to all those patriarchs in the Old Testament, Jesus' promises to his disciples and so on. God's promise is to be with them and be their God. May we listen to the priority of that promise.